Hello, and welcome to an Unplugged review of Half-Life Alyx, a game that my laptop can barely run. And I can't run that in OBS. I can't even run Chrome at the same time, honestly. So no footage. It's an Unplugged review. We've done this before. I should note right now, I'm not covering any specific gameplay spoilers, though I do have a bit at the very end about story spoilers, because this game has something big to say. I'll put it that way. And I should stress right now that I am playing the game on an Oculus Quest. So, Oculus Quest. Didn't have access to the grip of the index, because in the Valve Index, the whole controller is like pressure sensitive. So in the very beginning of the game, there's all these cans. You can crush them. Could not do that. Just thought I'd let you know. Half-Life Alyx is the first Half-Life in 13 years. It's been over a decade since we last got to explore this world. Technically, it's been almost a decade because Portal 2 takes place in the same world as Half-Life, but it's good to be back. That's the overlying theme here. It's good to be back. Half-Life Alyx is set 5 years before the events of Half-Life 2. You were playing as Alyx Vance, age 19, a reconnaissance agent for the human resistance during the Combine's occupation of the Earth. The game is set in mostly City 17, and this game does something amazing right off the bat that I love, and I hope we see more of this soon. City 17 finally feels like a cohesive world. There was a big problem, mostly with the Half-Life 2 series, where it didn't feel like a world. It felt like a bunch of corridors you hop backwards through at increasing speeds, and occasional puzzles to stop you from doing that. The whole river segment feels disconnected from everything else. Half-Life Alyx doesn't really have that problem. And I feel like it's because they're trying to make the most of the technology. Half-Life Alyx is a game of compromises, and I really appreciate what was spared to make a good interactive immersive experience. Half-Life Alyx's opening area makes the world of City 17 feel cohesive and complete. And I could talk about even just the interactivity in that opening area and make a whole video out of it. You're able to, raise the antenna and turn the dial of a radio. You can even find different stations. There's a bunch of whiteboard markers everywhere, and you can write right onto windows and whiteboards. There's a snark that you can feed. There's a snark. I think this is actually the first time a snark's appeared in a Half-Life game since Half-Life 1. It feels good. And there's so much information about what's happened in the last decade and a half, since the Resonance Cascade. There's newspapers and cassettes. You can't interact with the cassettes, but there's just a sense that this world has changed over time. You're not just plonked into a whole new environment. This environment has changed, and you kind of feel like you're a part of it. This game's plot is kicked off with Eli Vance stealing a mini reactor from the Combine. They've received a shipment of 1,000. Eli has pilfered 1, and he's hoping that will give the Resistance the jolt they need to kick the Combine out of City 17 and hopefully off of Earth. However, things didn't go well for Eli, and he's been arrested. He's being sent to Nova Prospekt. The reason is because he saw the vault. The Combine have this gigantic fortified spaceship. It's docked on Earth, and whatever's in it has to be frickin' important. The Resistance believes that this might be some sort of superweapon. And what's the perfect superweapon for a world-conquering empire than the one-man army who destroyed the Nihilanthe? Russell and Eli have reason to believe that Freeman is locked in this vault. After all, if the Combine could convince Freeman to work for them, the Resistance would be gone. Likewise, if Eli is able to get to Gordon and convince him to help them with the Resistance, there would be no more Combine. So, now knowing that there is a vault, and believing that there is something truly special in there, someone truly special in there, it's kind of a race against time to get into the vault and rescue, maybe, possibly, hopefully rescue Gordon Freeman. Or whatever else is in there. After all, you take from the Combine, they can't use that anymore. So, go get it. Before I talk about the gameplay itself, because I have some qualms with the gameplay, but I understand why they're there, I wanted to talk real quick about the sound, and specifically the voice cast and the music. The sound in this game is brilliant. I'll put it that way. Blanket statement, it's brilliant. But it's not as big of a cast as Half-Life 2 has had. There is no Dr. Kleiner. There is no Judith Mossman. There is no Breen. There is no Magnuson. I couldn't remember his name. For one thing, I feel like that's fine. But boy, do I miss Hal Robbins. I understand why Breen's not here. I understand why we don't have the original voice actor for Eli. They both passed away since the production of Half-Life 2 Episode 2, and it's unfortunate. Robert Guillaume and... Are they both Robert? Yeah, wow. Robert Guillaume and Robert Culp are wonderful actors. May they rest in peace. The new voice of Eli, James Moses Black, does a really solid performance. It's a little rough, it's a little raw, but it fits a younger Eli, and I like that a lot. By the time I was like halfway done with the game, I was perfectly content with Eli's voice, and going back and listening to the beginning, still cool with it. He sounded a little weird in the trailer, but I think that's just because I still had the original voice in my head so firmly. After having given James Moses Black a shot, he fits the role, and he can deliver a very emotive experience, a very emotive performance. Likewise, Merle Dandridge is not the voice of Alyx anymore. And out of respect for the actress, I'm just going to put the name on the screen. And I'm glad that it wasn't like they just shut out Dandridge or they just didn't want to pay. She's cool with this new talent filling the role. And she does a good job. Most of my concerns with the new voice of Alyx Vance isn't even the performance. It's a good performance. But it's the fact that this is a voiced protagonist in a Half-Life game, which feels a little sinful. And I get it, it's a new medium. All of your UI is on your hands, so it's not all visible. So when you're reloading a weapon, you'll hear Alyx go, "I've got 3 mags left," or something like that. Or she'll comment on something in the environment, or she'll just interact with Russell as you're looking around. And their interactions are great. And Rhys Darby as Russell is amazing. I love this performance. Although I'm getting a little concerned, I will admit. This is 2 story-driven Valve games in a row that have a foreign comedian as kind of like the second-in-command character. Because you had Stephen Merchant as Wheatley in Portal 2, and now you have Rhys Darby as Russell. And I like Russell a lot. He adds a lot to the world of Half-Life. But I don't know how I feel about a voiced protagonist in a Half-Life game. It feels like it kind of cheapens the experience a bit, but I get why. Half-Life Alyx cannot be a one-to-one Half-Life 2 into VR. It can't. And it's not trying to be that. Valve was very particular as to what themes and what gestalts they took from other sources and brought into Half-Life Alyx. And the end result doesn't feel like Half-Life in terms of gameplay. In my notes, I even have it written down. Half-Life Alyx feels like an amusement park dark ride. It's not as open and explorative. Puzzles are very, very regional. You don't have to go exploring the whole map for all the pieces to a puzzle. You might have a panel of some buttons, and you see what those buttons do right away. It's very Portal-esque. You're not looking for pieces to the puzzle. They're all here. You have to figure out what order to use them in. Likewise, you don't fight a lot of enemies at once. And most of the enemies you do fight, especially in the early game, are barnacles, which don't move. Half-Life Alyx isn't really about the combat, and it's not even really about like the action and the puzzle solving. This is kind of a game where you're scavenging. There are puzzles, and there is combat, but the explorative scavenging aspect of the game is the meat and potatoes of the game. You will be knocking things over in your environment to find ammo for your weapons and resin, which you can use to upgrade your weapons. This is something Half-Life is better for. Because if anything, it does give you a little bit of variety as to how you approach Half-Life. There is a lot of resin to collect, and it's scattered everywhere, and it's hidden, and you have to look around and really kind of like get down low or move a bunch of stuff to find all the resin. But I don't know if finding all of it would let you fully upgrade all of the game's weapons. Each weapon only has, I think, 4 different upgrades, and typically they make it easier to sight in on your opponent or easier to reload. For instance, the pistol, which is modeled after the 1911, which I personally like, you can get a bullet reservoir, which lets you store an extra mag's worth of ammo, effectively giving you an extended mag. Or at least you have to reload less often. You could also get a reflex sight, which allows you to have essentially like a red dot, so you can always... You know when you're aiming the weapon correctly, because you got the dot right over the enemy's head. Or you can just straight up get a laser, so you don't have to sight in. You can kind of just hip fire it. They each cost a different amount of resin, and there is kind of an order of operations that you're supposed to go in. But if you save your resin, you can get the better upgrades. And that does kind of add a little bit of flex and a little bit of replayability to Half-Life Alyx. You know, you might not have been able to get all of the expensive upgrades for all your weapons, but you can do a repeat playthrough and try them out. You can turn the shotgun into a grenade launcher. I like stuff like that. Unfortunately, there are only 3 weapons, and there's no melee. Half-Life Alyx is a dark ride, amusement park version of Half-Life, because it is a more pared down experience. There's less to go wrong, but at the same time, there's less to go right. There's very good ambience. Ambience is like the thing VR does well. It puts you in an environment. And they use music cues to really make you feel the emotion you should be feeling. You know, as somebody who's played the Half-Life games before and loves them to death, seeing 1 or 2 headcrab zombies doesn't get my heart racing. I just go, oh, there's some headcrab zombies. But Half-Life Alyx bangs on the walls. It makes all sorts of noise. It wants you to feel afraid. My laptop screen just turned black. And there's nothing wrong with this amusement park dark ride version of Half-Life. Again, VR has certain limitations. There's some things it can't do well. There's a lot of things it really can't do well. It's still a hardware in its infancy 30 years later. But while there isn't a lot there, so there isn't a lot to go wrong, and there isn't a lot to go right, the one thing you still can do is immerse a player in the world and in the story. And Half-Life Alyx does that tremendously. You feel like a part of the world. And I keep saying that, and it feels kind of shallow. But I'm just going to throw, this is the only Half-Life Alyx footage you'll see on this review on screen. This is footage of a dev build that allows you to play it as if it were Half-Life 2. And it still looks gorgeous, but so much of that panache is gone. You can't scavenge around on a shelf, opening up file cabinets looking for ammo and resin. You could abstract those actions a little bit, but physically putting yourself in that headspace is what Half-Life Alyx does so well. And this is why everybody is singing this game's praises, because it puts you in a familiar world phenomenally. If you've played Half-Life 2 and its episodes, you know the world of City 17. You know the world of post-Combine invasion Earth. And now you're living it. You have to scavenge for the ammo and the supplies. You have to take care of all the Zen threats still around. You have to shoot the Combine Man in between the eyes with your pistol. But now, that brings us to Spoiler Town. If you don't want to get spoiled, here's a timestamp. It'll stay on the screen while we play the little spoiler song. And of course, we play the spoiler song with the kazoo. So you've survived, so you're looking to get spoiled. Okay. I said I had story spoilers, and boy oh boy do I have story spoilers. First of all, huge props to Valve for not killing Russell. I expected Russell to be dead by the end of this game, and he wasn't. They're back. Fucking Valve is back, baby. So, inside the vault is not Freeman. It's the G-Man. And the G-Man finally gets to show the world the full extent of his powers. The final chapter is so brilliantly surreal. Physics are everywhere. You're walking along walls in an apartment building because they built the vault around an apartment building. And the further you get into the vault, the more twisted the sense of reality becomes. And I really, really appreciate that. It's super cool. It feels a little award baity. But when the G-Man shows his face and he shows you what he's capable of, he brings Alyx to the end of Half-Life 2 Episode 2, where she's mourning the death of Eli Vance. And you, the player, get to wind back time and kill the advisor that was going to kill Eli. But in doing so, the G-Man announces that, and he's kind of telling the player this, he's not telling Alyx this, that Gordon spent a lot of time procrastinating. We haven't gotten much results from him in the last 12 years. So the G-Man is taking Alyx as his new employee. And he leaves Gordon for dead. After the credits, you're in the ending of Half-Life 2 Episode 2. Eli's alive, Alyx is gone. And while Eli is swearing out the G-Man, he's standing in the corner and he walks out, and Dog shows up and he throws you the crowbar, and then it cuts to black. And Valve has already announced they're already working on the next entry for Half-Life. They're back. We're like, this is the most concrete of an answer as to when we can expect Half-Life again I've ever seen. First of all, it's not, because the game's out. But we're getting a true to honest continuation to the Half-Life story. They wouldn't give us this cliffhanger if they knew they weren't going to work on another Half-Life game in the next 12 years. They're back. And they're back to doing single-player story-driven games. They're still going to do their multiplayer stuff. They have like a bunch of Dota games now. They got CSGO is printing money like nobody's business. Team Fortress 2 still exists, I guess. In my video, how Portal 2 drives player motivation, I mentioned that game was kind of Valve's swan song. And for years, it felt like Valve was done with the single-player story-driven game. After all, CSGO and Dota make way too much money. So it makes sense to support them. But I think Valve has finally cleared up their schedule enough to continue to work on the Half-Life series. And if that's true, and the next game is coming soon, relatively speaking, even if that's in the next 2, 3, 4 years, that's so soon. If the next Half-Life game comes out in 2025, that will be shorter than the gap between Half-Life 1 to Half-Life 2. Even when I was writing the Portal 2 video, there were stirrings that there was something coming out of Valve soon. Something single-player, something story-driven. And I was skeptical, and there were a lot of skeptics, but I feel so right in saying Valve is back. And they're not going to leave us hanging this time. And if they get my trust and they don't deliver, again, tell us things. Keep in contact with us. Where is the story of Half-Life going? Is it getting worked on? If they don't tell us anything, and we get another, 10-year hiatus without any word, I'm coming over there and I'm unscrewing that big valve in their center office, which will cause their whole building to just fly off into space, because that's what's holding it to the ground. They don't want you knowing that. I know it. I'll do it. Alright, spoilers over. Let's welcome the folks back from the people who dodged Spoiler Town. Welcome back. Half-Life Alyx tells us a lot of things, but the thing it tells us the most is that Valve is willing to put their nose to the grindstone once more and tell us a story. And that's so big. Even if the gameplay of this game is just mediocre. And I feel like a lot of VR games are. But just on the whole, this is probably one of the weaker Half-Life games in terms of gameplay. That doesn't really... That's not contextually important. What's important here is its story. And that's something Valve's been kind of lacking for a long, long while. And it feels so right to be playing a story-driven Valve game in 2020. A new one. My final verdict is that while Half-Life Alyx is best enjoyed in VR, it's really about the adventure. It's about the story. I totally get that VR is a limiting factor. Less than 1% of all Steam users have a VR headset, or have ever used a VR headset. It's not even whether or not they have one. I technically count as someone who has a VR headset, even though it's not mine. I'm borrowing it. But no matter what it takes, I can only hope that people who were looking forward to what's next for Half-Life can see this story through to its end. Even if that's, you find a friend on Discord or Steam, and they broadcast the game to you while they play and you watch, whether that's you find a long play, or a let's play, or a live stream on YouTube, and you watch that through. Please, find some way to experience the world and the story of Half-Life Alyx. By the time it's all said and done, I'm certain that you'll be just as excited as I am, as the rest of the world is, for a continuation to Half-Life. And if anything, Half-Life Alyx tells us and confirms with us that next step is closer than we think. And it feels so wild to say those words out loud. Half-Life Alyx is available on PC. You can play it through the Valve Index, HTC Vive, Oculus headsets. I've been playing it on the Oculus Quest through the Oculus Link app on PC, and Windows Mixed Reality. The game costs $60 minus the cost of the headset. And I believe if you purchase, it might still be if you purchase a Valve Index, you get a copy of Half-Life Alyx free. I cannot confirm that. Please look on the Valve Index website for more information. Half-Life, we've missed you. But it's time to wake up and smell the ashes.